Oh, kia ora everybody, what's up? It is Robett. Welcome to Robett Live. Back to back to backs. Another awesome weapon. Good friend. MCR, Melissa Clark-Reynolds. How are you?
I'm good. I'm really good. Yeah, I'm surprised at how much I've enjoyed the whole Rahui lockdown thing.
Yeah. Well, you've got
Yeah.
you've got the books, you got the hang time. How's the isolation world going for you?
I think the thing that's actually driving me crazy is that, like, literally, I'm on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Skype or WhatsApp. Or one of the
Yeah.
days I worked out, I'd been on 12 platforms, and I'm sort of over the
Yeah.
platforms, to be fair.
Y-
And I thought there'd be a lot more gardening and reading and lying in the bath. And yesterday, I put the rubbish into the rubbish tin. I realised it was at 9 o'clock at night. It was the first actual step I'd taken out of the house. Like, it's just ridiculous. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I've got platform fatigue. But other than that, I've loved having some time to do some courses and some thinking, and yeah, just it's been nice to be home. I'm a big traveler. I think, as you know, like I average 3 flights a week, and I have so loved not spending an hour getting to the airport, spending an hour at the airport, spending another hour in traffic at the other end, traveling for 3 hours to get to a meeting, traveling 3 hours home. I'm just really loving not doing that.
Would you rather your 12 platforms to have digital connection or the 3 flights a week with the
That's a
24
tough
hours of
choice.
waiting?
I'd actually rather have maybe one or two really great platforms that worked.
Yes.
And yeah, I'm seeing, all of the workarounds that we're having to do with platforms makes me realize that there's still room in the market for someone to trump, good Trump, not bad Trump Zoom. And, yeah, it's the best we've got at the moment. But I'm kind of finding that I'm linking people on a Slack channel to, well, stupid thing I'm doing today. I sent out a type form, and then we're putting it out in Slack, and then we're running a Zoom meeting on Mural. It's just it's just ridiculous.
Platform fatigue. I haven't heard that before. I'm going to use it. I was on a call yesterday with the bro Heta, and he was saying the same thing. He was like, bro, I've been bouncing from this Microsoft thing, and then on the Google thing, and then on this thing, and then the Facebook thing, and he's just like, ugh.
Yeah.
And
And
I was saying,
the webinar stuff.
yeah. And as soon as you get to
Stupid.
like text, it's like, okay, now almost it feels like you've got emails, blue text messages, WhatsApps, green text messages, Facebook
Yeah.
messages, and
Yeah.
LinkedIn messages as the stream of all of it.
And then my family's all joined House Party and Marco
Yeah.
Polo. And then I just don't know where to look for messages anymore.
Yeah, when I first got, I remember when the iPhone came out, and then you could get a push notification, and I was like, oh, mean email you, and then now it's just like every notification is off.
Yeah.
Like my phone, pretty much my phone just doesn't even, it goes on do not disturb to even be able to call, and then I wake
Yeah.
up and then I'll just have to batch it, and then you see all the things with all the dots on top of it. You're just like, oh, I think you have a point there. Consolidated messaging across all into one would
Yeah.
be. It feels like the platforms have almost become channels, right?
Yeah, they
Um,
have.
when you look at
And
TV
this,
of like what happened between TV to go to Sky, and then now if you look at the states, and you now if you look at even the get into the media space, and you got Disney Plus here, and then ESPN and Hulu and Netflix and
yeah.
and it's like fuck, just
And it's like when I moved to the US, and it was like you've got 355 channels and there's still nothing to watch. And it feels a wee bit like that, right? I'm now on all these channels on my phone, and my family are still sending me pictures of cats or, stupid videos. It's like, I don't think
oh
this was not the height of what we were expecting the 21st century to look like.
no, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. But
jeez,
otherwly, it's good.
some
It's
first
really
world
interesting,
problem
I
shit
think,
though,
thinking
huh?
about what we do next. Where do we go
Yes,
out of this?
let's go there. So
Yeah.
um you've dabbled in many industries, and you've got depth with thinking, and and it was actually, you'd probably be similar to, I was on the phone earlier to someone else, and he was saying those that are those that have a seat at the table are twice as busy, and those
Yeah.
that don't are doing nothing.
Yeah.
And I was like, I feel bad, just as bad for both.
Yeah.
Um, like I'm in San Fran at the moment, and I'm kind of going, 9 till 2 American time, playing catch up work stuff. Then I'm going to New Zealand day from 9 through. So I'm kind of doing, 14, 14, 15s on my side. But yeah, it's weird just to see that. Have you noticed from your either comms or engagement with all your stuff? Clearly, you're probably just as busy as anyone. Have you got Has your schedule got crazier since all this in the last month?
My schedule's got crazier because the lack of travel time means I don't have breaks between meetings anymore. So there's not even like that 15-minute kind of quick, hey, let's go grab a coffee before the next meeting starts, even just for the walk, like all of that's disappeared. And so, yesterday I started at 8 in the morning. I finished at about 8 at night. I had done an online yoga class in there for an hour. But, it's, I set my local studio up and I ended up, I was trying to do it remote and it didn't work. So I ended up just like couriering them a laptop that was all set up with, again, all the platforms they needed to be able to get their business back up and running. And that's been a joy. I think one of the things I've missed the most is my yoga community. It's like turning up to class. But anyway, it's still nice seeing 27 people at yoga class yesterday on Zoom. But coming back, I think that your comment about the people with the seat at the table is an interesting one to me, because I think one of the concerns I have is that when people are under stress, they tend to revert to the patterns they know, which means that the kind of same old people have the seats at the table at the moment. I think it's really hard for new people to get a seat at the table, or for really diverse voices to get a seat at the table at the moment. I'm not seeing in the commentaries I'm seeing in the press, say in New Zealand, I'm not seeing enough Māori voices. I'm not seeing enough women's voices. I seem to be seeing a lot of tech bros. And I seem to be, I'm serious. Don't you think? All the tech bros have got some reckons. I'm about over their reckons. And they start with, look, I don't know anything except that I'm a tech bro. And so I reckon. And like, I just want to, I've stopped reading at that point now. At the beginning, I read them and just wanted to punch them. And now I just can't read anymore.
Well, I had a conversation with Michelle Dickinson about this. And I said,
oh, cool.
I said, don't you wish that that scientists and educated humans that actually know what's up had the same voice and ear to the masses, like others who potentially maybe just win by default because they're on a platform that has the loudest voice? And she was like, man, I said, I want, I was talking about, I want like the nurses and the firefighters and the policemen and the scientists and the educators to, they need to be the actual heroes and have the platforms of influence and be listened to like the superheroes. Like, I failed science, I failed high school, the rest of it. But, I talked to, we had Sir Peter Gluckman on yesterday.
Wow.
And just having him yarn, and I'm sitting there just like, this is some shit. And just watching him like, just elevate the actual conversation to the real shit, but simplified in a way that made so much sense. I kind of sat there and I was like, man, I just don't think we're doing, I don't know if it's a New Zealand media thing or just the way that the platforms operate, the way that we consume content, or the way that, however it is. But I really feel that those that are educated, that know what's up, haven't had the loudest microphone.
Yeah. And it feels to me like there's a bunch of that where, in New Zealand, somehow we seem to have a bit of a distrust of really smart people. And so, or we think that if they're educated, that somehow that doesn't count for anything. And it can be anything from, I don't know, urban planning and housing through to epidemiology. It's like everyone's an epidemiologist now, and it just gets a bit tiresome. I studied this stuff at university at master's level. It's not easy, and then suddenly we end up with, just because you can Google and read the New York Times doesn't make you, or, the Imperial College of London's reports or whatever doesn't make you an epidemiologist overnight. And some of these guys with very loud voices and big platforms, I think, are going to do us a big disservice. Well, so we have to amplify the voices of everyone else, So and in there I would include Women's Refuge and the people who are doing the real frontline hard, the people who, before shutdown, I went and I dropped in sacks of food to various places that I knew would be feeding people during the shutdown. Because at that point, I had no idea whether or not they'd be able to do any shopping or whether they'd be able to buy bulk food. And I thought, we need to be really amplifying their voices. I haven't heard from whoever's running the men's night shelter. I haven't heard from the SPCA.
I'm trying to get the CEO on. Yeah.
Oh, good. I just want to hear from a greater variety of voices. And
So
so good for you for finding platforms for people who are not getting it in the mainstream media.
yeah, it was really weird. Like mine kind of kicked in where my sort of DMs and messages started popping pretty heavy on text and stuff right before going to lockdown. It was kind of like friends with advice around, business and thinking and fear. And then
Yeah,
I just kind of put myself in their shoes. I'm like, wait a second, you're going to have these people freaking out at home by themselves and they don't have access to thinking and conversation at levels which it's like
yeah,
I remember how I felt when I'd never been on a board before, and
yeah.
I could imagine what this holy grail circle of flipping Illuminati shit was like, and like this whole thing. And after you're in there, you can't even explain it until you literally then get there. So then I'm like, how do you then take the knowledge and the thinking and the resource and the just the opportunity that I've actually got? So I was like, stuff that. Now's the time to do it. And that's why I've just gone flipping to town. I'm just like, yo,
I'm so
banter,
glad
let's
you're
go.
doing
Yo,
it.
banter. It's
Yeah,
becoming
yeah.
a
No, I'm
thing.
so glad you're doing it. It's funny because I was feeling like that prior to lockdown. I started working for a couple of my clients. So I work as a futurist and a foresight practitioner as well as a company director. And so in January, a couple of my clients, we started running one-day workshops on what we were going to do and how. And then by February, I was starting to get more and more anxious. And then in early March, I got Michael Baker, who's an epidemiologist here, and we did a series of videos for company directors. And it was quite funny because I went down to the cafe to buy him a coffee, and I was really like, I just didn't want anyone to touch me. And this is a good week and a half, 10 days before lockdown. And I'm like, don't come near me, don't touch me, don't breathe on me. Got his coffee, ran back upstairs. And that was the last time I went into a cafe. And then we're in the middle of doing our discussion and interview for directors. And I just thought, that's it, I'm going home. And so once we were done, I was done. I just did not want to be anywhere else. And then I kept thinking, I'm telling people that we've got to go into lockdown. I'm telling people that we've got to go home. So I did. And then on that weekend, went and picked up my man's stuff out of his office and came home. And so, we've done an extra couple of weeks at home. And I just am so grateful that I've done that because we haven't been sick. I've had a few friends that have become sick, and luckily they've recovered. But I'm really, really glad that I also sort of took my own advice and thought, I'm telling other companies and I'm telling company directors that we have to be planning for this. And being on multiple boards, we were running a lot of experiments like, can we work from home? Most of the companies I'm involved with, we started running those a month to 6 weeks before lockdown. And so, I felt like we were in really good shape when we've gone into lockdown. And a good example is Radio New Zealand, where I'm deputy chair. And if you've been listening to Radio New Zealand, we're running that out of our presenters' bedrooms. We've discovered that duvets stapled to the walls makes a pretty good studio. But we've managed to run that. And a lot of it was because we learnt from the earthquakes that we've been shut out of our buildings. And I guess one of the big questions I'm currently asking myself is like, we thought about those earthquakes as a practice for some bigger crisis. And what if this isn't the crisis? What if this is the practice for the next one? And at the moment, I don't think we're really thinking about that. We're sort of thinking about how to get through this one. But I think we also need to be really sitting down and thinking about what this means for the next pandemic or the next big earthquake or the next financial crash or whatever it is. And we should be using those foresight skills that some of us have to start thinking about, okay, let's not build the old past when we come out of here. Let's build a new future when we come out. But also at the individual company level, how are we making ourselves more resilient so that this doesn't happen, or so that the event will happen, but so that the impacts aren't so great next time.
We had Tony Falkenstein on the Pro Tony last week, and they wrote a pandemic plan in 2009.
Yeah.
And when this popped out, the one of their crew was like, hey, here's this thing that we dug up, and they had the whole thing on lock. And I was just kind of thinking, the amount of businesses that didn't have that, pretty much every single small business hadn't thought of that moving forward. A lot of the big crew had protocols in place, but hadn't really actioned it at that sort of scale.
I know, I never tested them. I'm on a bunch of risk committees, and I had one organisation where the CE mocked us for having a pandemic plan.
I don't know who he is, but tell him he's dumb. Be like, oi, mate, you're dumb.
I mean, luckily he's actually done a great job.
Okay,
But,
well, let's not name and shame, but he was
yeah,
dumb.
let's not name and
Let's just say
shame. But, I
But anyway, I
remember
thought it
just
was
being quite
Steve.
aghast when he got so upset. I sort of thought we were really wasting time. But it won't just be pandemic. It'll be an earthquake, or it'll be something
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, what has been interesting is people have known that there's been different forms of stuff like this with either SARS or bits and pieces before. So, but we haven't gone through the motions to actually run it. And there's been a lot of kind of like not on the fly decisions or maneuvering, but it was very clear that there wasn't an actual plan until everyone kind of made it together, right?
Yeah.
But then to your point, I think you're right, because it won't be probably the first time in our lives that there's going to be potentially something like this. So the train tracks have obviously now, it's very clear now, every business is now cloud based or digital based in some form. So I do not think that as a macro will change and go back, right?
Yeah.
The difference is
there's still a lot of companies that aren't there. There are large swathes of the government in New Zealand that are not there, and there's a lot of small businesses that are not there. Now, I spend a lot of time in agriculture, and I've just been so heartened seeing like the Greytown Butcher and Cranky Goat Cheese and all these lovely artisan producers have finally, in the last week, got it together and put websites up and discovered that they can run really great businesses online. And so I think that that's happening, but there's still a lot of companies that are not in there. And, we know that there's something like 100,000 children at home out of the 800,000 kids who are at home in New Zealand at the moment who have no access to devices. So what it does also do is it means that we've got to address this digital divide. We've got to, I heard a great thing the other day, which I really loved, I'm going to repeat, which is that the businesses have failed in this period, had pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
And I really like that. And they did, a lot of them, and particularly the big public ones, they were in trouble for a long time. And this has been kind of a handy moment to get round to closing it or, throwing in the towel. But their boards should have been onto it a long time earlier.
Yeah.
And a lot of those companies haven't found a digital business model. If they've found a digital delivery process, they still hadn't found a business model that worked for them. And I think we've got to really help companies figure that out in the next short period of time.
Yeah, there's a lot in there, eh? I think maybe I'll jump to the model side, the pre-existing conditions. 100%. It's exposed so many, but at the same time, it's given a scapegoat for shutting it, because there is so much action in the market.
Yeah.
Everyone can just do their piece because it's just another thing on top of the thing, opposed to when it was just business as usual. Like, imagine if this was 2018 and then last year, 2019, and then Bauer went under.
Yeah.
The problems
but
were there
Bauer
then.
hasn't gone under. That's what I think is really important to understand, is Bauer hasn't gone under. The owners of Bauer made a decision to withdraw. Now, that has been on the cards for a long time.
They didn't even want the money. They didn't even want the subsidy. They didn't want any of it. They're just like, nah, we're good.
Yeah, we're good. And they were good, because they actually were kind of going to make this decision anyway. It just accelerated it. And so, I just think we have to be careful about kind of blaming COVID-19 for some of these closures where they're a failure of the business model. They're a failure of the ownership, not a failure of the market.
Yep, I get it. There's another media CEO that's got a big challenge on their hands, and I was like, well, either way, it's kind of a win, because if it fails, then they've got the vehicle of this as an excuse, and if it pops, hero. So either way, you're kind of like, well, there you go. What's the most frustrating thing you've seen so far, outside of the science and the lack of education and those that potentially have the loudest voice not being the smartest, outside of that whole thing? What do you think's frustrated you the most with a business lens? Naivety from CEOs, naivety from lack of prep. Like, what's been the thing you're like, fuck, come on, guys?
I think it has been the companies that could have gone properly digital and haven't. And so, I think about as a government agency that I know of that ordered 2,000 laptops the day of lockdown, and will get them in May. And even if they do get those laptops in May, they clearly don't have digital systems in place. They don't have a digital backbone. But I would say that the same is true in the, agri sector. Um, a company that I really love sent me a text message yesterday that was about 20 lines long that told me that I could email them to order some of their product. And then when I did email them, you have to go email back and forth, and then you've got to put money into their bank account,
Or
right? And
email
this
your
is a
credit
company
card.
that's
It'll
doing
be
it
sweet.
hard. What was
Yeah.
that?
Or just email back with your credit card number.
Yeah, but they couldn't even take my credit card, right? So I just feel sad that the leadership of organisations like this hasn't done a digital plan earlier. I've been online since the 80s, basically. 1989 was when I first learned how to code my way onto the internet. And so I know that's an outlier, but the last 20 years, certainly, e-commerce has been a thing. And so when I see boards that let companies run as if e-commerce isn't a thing yet, it really bothers me. I think that's probably been my biggest frustration.
Do you think that is lack of self-awareness from leadership? Do you think it's a fear for the future of leadership? Do you think it is arrogance from how it was done? Do you think it's old school thinking? Like, what's the handbrake
I think there's a
mentally
lot
that's
of
missing?
fear of getting it wrong. Do you know, like everybody knows about the IT train smashers. We can all name big public stuff, whether it's like Insys or Teachers Payroll or KiwiBank, or, we can all name companies that are in public that have spent tens of millions of dollars and got nowhere. And I think no board wants to be that board. And so what's happened, and you think too, most boards are well older than us. I'm a young person on a board, which makes you like a teenager on the board, right?
I don't get invited to too many these days. for a multitude of reasons. But
I think as we get older, we get more risk averse. We don't take more risk as we get older, and we and there's a whole lot of science around endocrinology that shows that physiologically, the older we get, the more risk averse we get. So I think what happens is that boards are afraid of getting it wrong. And so inaction takes over rather than, and we've got all this agile, like, you don't have to do tens of millions anymore. You can spend $1 million and see how it goes. You can spend $500,000 and see how it goes. You can spend 200 grand and see how it goes. The kind of the era of the $1 billion upgrade stuff, it's gone. But I think that, again, a lot of boards don't know that.
Do you think there's going to be a big shake-up in boards because there's going to be a reality check to the real world and understanding that they don't have the right brains at the table for the world that they're now in?
I don't know. We had that, surely we've had these moments before, right? We've had, in my career, I've had various, I've had the collapse of the Asian banking system. I've had the tech bubble pop. I've had the GFC. We've had a lot of moments where we might decide that maybe leaving the old guard in place may not be working for us. I wouldn't underestimate the power of that old guard to fight for their place at the table.
Yeah, I love Rob Campbell's commentary when he talks about stuff like this, because he just like plants the seeds so strategically well for everyone that looks like him to embrace those that don't look like them. I love it how he navigates it so elegantly. It's genius. And when you're talking before about that media side, he was talking about this idea. Is it recency bias? Is that the right word? Of whatever you kind of hear the most.
Oh, yes.
The most
that's
recently.
The thing.
That's
Whatever's on top is what you remember.
And it's like that headline clickbait sort of reading mentality. And when you kind of take that, because we were talking about a similar thing when he was on the show, and he said something like that, and I was like, shit, you're right. And then they think that that's the truth because that's what they've heard most recently. And then it was I don't know the full explanation, but he was basically saying, because then if you're telling someone and then they make you feel like that's not right, then you go into defense mode because that's what you've heard. You don't want to look like you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so, and I'm like, what? This is some shit. Boards. Flipping boards. Man, you must have had it seen. How's the frustration been to be not only probably right historically, but then going through the wave of still, from you're talking about 1989, I think you were saying you're first in the game on tech, still to not have leaders now do it. Like, how frustrating has it been through the decades now of being a woman in tech and still not flipping getting listened to? You're like, what the fuck? What more do I need to do? You bunch of muppets. This is
I don't
stuff.
know.
Or do you just kind of like stuff it? It's like, all right, man, just you muppets, just do your shit. Like, how do you? I don't know, man. So in snowboarding, I always go back to snowboarding. So in snowboarding, there'd be like crew that would come in and they'd try to learn these tricks and this or that. And then when you've been in the game for a minute, like, oh, if you don't, pre-wind up on the toes to counter, blah, 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 whatever, like, you just know. And then you'll tell them, be like, all right, yo, you just got to do the thing. It's like, all right, cool, cool, cool. And they keep skidding off the heels instead of the toes. They keep skidding off the heels. And you're like, and then eventually you're like, all right, bro, just, all right, cool.
But see, I think there's an insight in there. So I'm a big fan these days of coalition of the willing. Do you know, like in the old days when I was younger and brattier and thought I knew everything, I used to probably want to change everyone. And I've learned a couple of things now. So I try and find the people that are already wanting to move in the right direction and then amplify them. So as a board member, I want to support organisations that are doing amazing stuff. Like I've just taken over as chair of Little Yellow Bird, which, we do ethical uniform production.
Samantha
and we
Jones,
did a really
awesome.
fast pivot in this lockdown situation where we've managed to stay true to our values, and we're doing organic cotton masks. And we found a New Zealand company that does wool filters that are N95 filters that are compostable. And so, we managed to find a way within the values base of doing what we can. And I look across my portfolio of companies and things like Radio New Zealand too, like I've got put on there to help them to digitize. And it was 6 years ago, and Radio New Zealand 6 years ago and Radio New Zealand today is a completely different beast. And that's part of why we are able to be up and running and cranking during this crisis. And so I look around and the same, like I'm on the board of Beef and Lamb, right? Which for me is slightly off brand, but I love being there. And the same thing, I could bring those technical skills into that organisation, and we've been able to run largely from home and quite seamless. And so for me, it's like, I don't want to bash my head against a wall. I want to find the coalition of the willing, people that are fun to work with, people that are fun to play with. And we'll just quietly get on with it over here. And you guys can do whatever it is that you're doing over there. And we'll just, like Buckminster Fuller is one of my heroes since I was a kid. And he says, to paraphrase him, but basically, you don't get anywhere making the old model wrong. What you have to do is make it obsolete. And I think the best way of making the old model obsolete is building the new one alongside it. And what happens is a bit like, Bauer or something, they just move away. They don't want to compete anymore when the model's got to a point that the world has changed around them. I guess I'm just sick of trying to change them now. I gave that up about 20 years ago.
No, so I'll go there for a sec. So when I started popping up in the mix, and there was a little bit, maybe when we first sort of connected or met up years ago, I kind of felt like I'd got rolled out to a bunch of these like chats and think groups and all this flipping shit, right? And I just went into it all like, stars and shiny shit. And I came in, I just like, did all my stuff, whatever. And then when I saw no action, just time after time after time after time after time after time after time. And I just sat there, I was like, you know what? Stuff this noise. I'm not going to be reactionary waiting for anyone to do shit. I'm just going to do my own flipping thing.
Yeah.
And that's it. And then funny enough, one of the ones circled back round 4 years later, sat down, new face, same role. Hey, I'd love to catch up and have a talk about this. Dot. I'm sure you can imagine what it was. And then I'm sitting there and I go, I'm not trying to sound like a dick here, but the amount of time that I have copy pasted the same conversation with someone that's looked like you that sat on the other time and not said anything.
Right.
I'm not trying to be dismissive. I've just almost lost hope in an organization like you're in to do this. And
I totally get that. And I think I probably had exactly the same conversation with the same group of people. And, and I just got to a point where it was like, well, I'm going to put it out there, the accelerator movement. You know, I just feel like they should rename themselves White Boy Accelerator Incubators. You know,
we're going there.
I know we've gone there, but I actually said it to one of them. I said, look, let's not pretend. Let's not do a women's stream. Let's just rename the whole thing White Boy Tech Co. And, you know, let's understand that that's where you're funneling government money, is to help more white boys start up more tech co's, you know, and then I just realized that just was deeply frustrating. Actually, I should just do something else. And so something else that I do is things like go on their boards, mentor those women CEs, get up and under, put some money into those Māori enterprises that are starting up, you know. And it's like, I just need to leverage it in a different way, because it was just getting me down, not getting them down.
Yeah. It's funny you went there, because I've just felt this funky thing of when it's, you know, reliable data equals reliable results, and when it's just copy paste for so long, it just it builds this kind of like internal resentment which you don't want to have, but then you can feel it, and then when you see little bits popping around, I think we're on the same page there. But then to your point, it's like, so you go. Right.
I was going to say, I think probably just reflecting, one of the good things about not traveling is I am definitely not traveling to any meetings in the future that I'm not convinced I need to be at. Do you know what I mean?
There you go. Yep.
Like, I am not getting on a plane, putting any more emissions into the atmosphere for a meeting that is kind of so-so.
Or copy paste. Yeah, it's like...
no copy paste.
Yeah. I think you just hit a point as well. You know, so I've been thinking about... probably good timing. So for the last 3 years, I've been talking about this thing called the squeeze. And it's when the 3s and 4s are becoming the 1s and 2s. The young buck, rookie, you know... Nice. Go get me a coffee, shut your face, is now becoming the marketing manager, the GM, a young MD, maybe a young buck CEO. It's starting to flip, right? But the squeeze is like a 36 to 42 years old. I'm at the bottom end of the squeeze. I'm only 34, but that's the squeeze happening. And it's where I've kind of crafted it as, it's where you're old enough that you've done enough shit that you've got credibility to be able to be in the room, but you're still young enough that you know what's up. The squeeze. And there's been a couple of, because I've got a few, you know, chats with crews and shit, and everyone sort of talks. And I was on one yesterday, and I just kind of said, you know what? In my opinion, I feel this could be the time to flip and shake the boat out of the shit. Like, how do you flip and just come in there and don't be seen as the liability, be used as the asset? You know, like, cool, you know, to your point before about the different ways of thinking, it's like, well, now what does that look like? Where are all those middle weapons? And one of the things that, and I was saying on the call is like, I felt really lonely in my position because I didn't see people that look like me, roll like me in my lane. So by default, you just kind of feel like, and pro to your point as well, then the crazies always connect because the weird is the wonderful. And that's why the coalition of the willing, to your exact point, Mel, that's such a true thing. But I think now is such an amazing time to be able to not only change that narrative, but to really drive that forward and actually try and force a seat at the table for those conversations which need to be had. Like, I genuinely feel that. So
and I think it's hard. Like, I was reflecting back, you know, so 20 years ago, I was 35. I was the CE of quite a big company. You know, I started it in my bedroom. I took it up to 190 million in revenue. And so at 35, I was CE of a 190 million revenue company. And it was hard to, even then, you know, I was one of the few women who ran any New Zealand business over 100 mil, and it was bloody hard to get a seat at the table. And I think that experience helped to shape my future kind of choices. And in a couple of ways, you know, one of them is that after I'd done that, you know, I went home, I had another baby, and for me, my family became way more important. And I made a bunch of choices around that. I went and trained with Al Gore, and I volunteered around climate. And I look back over this last sort of 20-year period, and I realized that I wanted to work with different people, that my self-worth didn't matter about being at the table anymore. And so sometimes that's frustrating because you want to shake people and go, listen to the people who understand this stuff. On the other hand, there's some sort of a gentleness that comes from age, I think, that you go, you know what, we've seen this stuff before. Coming back to the viruses, we know that there's a pandemic every 3.5 years now. So there'll be another one in 3.5 years. It might be worse, it might be not so bad. We don't know, but the likelihood is, there'll be another one in 3.5 years. And I think that there's something nice about, the rhythm that comes from getting older and having been through some of this stuff before, that you don't have to force it quite as hard as I might have felt like I needed to when I was in my 30s, and it felt really urgent.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, it's a funky one there, because a friend of mine who I hadn't seen in probably 5 or 6 years, they caught up with him in December, and then they're like, "Your energy's different," and I'm like, "What do you mean?" He's like, "Oh, you're more calculated."
Yeah, less random is how I felt in my 40s,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. It's
Yeah.
a little bit more calculated. I was like, I get it, and maybe it's that point you start to seeing things are different. That's maybe we're talking about that squeeze sort of changing around. We've got Anna Gunther. She's asked the question. Anna,
Hey,
she said,
Anna.
what's the new future that you want?" Ooh, big
Wow.
call. So
Well,
sprinkle dust, little MCR sprinkle
I
dust of
could
New
sprinkle
Zealand. What
some
happens?
dust, yeah.
Yep.
Well, I would really love to see a far more inclusive future. One of the things that I've particularly loved about being at home has been all of the bird life in my garden and how the quiet. And so I'd really like to see a more inclusive future where those 100,000 kids that don't have access to the internet have it, preferably for free. I'd like to see that the 500,000 New Zealanders who before lockdown were suffering under food insecurity, and it's probably now like 1 million, that we have food for everyone when we're in a country that grows and creates such abundant food. I'd like to see wealth better distributed. We've become a country that, like many other places in the world, the difference between what the high end has and the lower end has just like polarized. And related to that has been our education system. I'm glad to see the crumbling of the NCEA system, but national standards was an absolute disaster for New Zealanders, and particularly for Māori and Pacific students. It was also a disaster for our gifted students, where we had the fastest falling top 15% in the world under national standards. So we were a country that had an education system that was child-centred, that was very much around, when my son went through, he went through a system that was very much about his interests, what made him happy, lots of art, lots of music, lots of sport, maybe not enough science. My daughter went through in the era of national standards where, since she's been 4, basically, she's been tested and found to be wanting. And so I'm not surprised that Gen Z are full of anxiety, because they've been tested and measured and prodded their whole lives and not encouraged to just go and play in the woods. And so, there's a few of these things, but I think they come together. So child-centered education, where we use the best technology that we have, that we all have access to, and the ability for us to distribute our wealth so that we all can play, it really bothers me that in this current situation, we're probably becoming even more polarized between the people who have money and savings and the people who are living on the gig economy on the knife edge. So that's a start. I'd like it to be clean, green, ethical, and inclusive.
No,
that's what I want.
So pretty much change everything. Okay, cool.
Yeah, change everything. Change all of it. And don't let a good crisis go to waste. Because the forces for the past and the forces for status quo are very, very strong. And so we have to do what we can to grab what moments we can to shake that up. And this is one of them.
You hit on probably the exact point when you said the gap splitting between the dollars or the haves and the have-nots is probably exactly the point before. Those who have got a seat at the table are twice as busy, and those that aren't are doing nothing.
Yeah.
Like that is, we started on that exact note. So then going to the money stuff, right? So when all of this shit in America did all the, I don't know, it was the Tea Party, all this other shit about the 1%, yada, yada, yada. How do you practically distribute wealth better? What does that look like? Is this taxes? Is this universal basic income? Is this like, what does that mean? Like, what is that? What does that look like? How does that translate?
Look, It's not my thing, right? The thing that I do is that I've always been proud to pay taxes. I grew up in a pretty poor family. My dad wasn't around. My mother was a single mum in the sort of early 70s. 1974, the DPB came in, and it was the first time my family had a reliable income. And I'm incredibly grateful to the state for providing for me. And not only that, I had basically free education, and I got to go through university at a time where it was, all intents and purposes free. And I got a $27 a week bursary to go. So my personal escape from poverty, which was moderately inevitable given my mother and my grandmother's history, was through education. And so, I think we have to do it at a macro and a micro level. So coming back to that education bit, it meant that as soon as I could pay taxes, I was just really proud to, because I wanted to pay that money back. And I wanted to pay it forward. And in a small country like New Zealand, our taxation system should be the process by which we pay it forward. And in a lot of other countries, philanthropy is how people pay it forward. And I think, that's still valid. And I give what I can, when I can, where I can. But I think that our taxation system for a country like New Zealand has got to be one of our biggest ways of redistributing wealth. And I'm not saying, we should take everything off people. I'm just saying that I don't want to live in a country where people are hungry. And I grew up hungry. I don't want to live in a country where, my mum had to leave school at 15 because her mother couldn't afford to keep her at school anymore because her mum was also on her own. And I don't want to live in a country where kids have to leave school to pay the bills. I want them to leave school because they're going to something that's better, or they've got an apprenticeship. So for me, the taxation system is the key one. And so every time I hear someone say cut taxes, all I can think of is selfish greed.
Less food.
Yeah.
I remember you just brought back a memory. So growing up in Aranui in my high school, in my 7th form, before everyone left, right? And so in my final year, I think there was maybe 13 of us left in the class for all of it, out of however many. And then the teacher, Miss Foster, was like, "Okay, cool." And she went, "All right, what's everyone going to do with their future? Where are you going to go to, blah, blah, blah." And 4 girls out of the 7 or 8 literally said, "Oh, I'm going to get pregnant and have a kid, then I can on the DPB. And then if I get a second one, it's an extra $114 a week." And they'd already had the shit planned out. They were like, no, I just do that and I get that, and then that's it. So there's always going to be that.
But we have to give those girls hope, right?
Yeah.
So, I was sort of, I guess I was a bit like one of those girls. I didn't get pregnant to get on the DPB. But, I had my first child a week after my 18th birthday. And one of my aunts congratulated me because I could go on the DPB. And I remember looking at her with complete horror and going, hang on a minute, I chose to have this child and I'm going to raise it. And for me, I did, and I totally am grateful for the DPB for my mum. For me, I've always provided for my child and my children. But I can see that even me as a teenage mum, having a child was a symbol of some of the lack of hope that I had in my life. And so we also have to think about what is it that means that those girls needed something to love. For that was what it was for me in many ways. It was about being needed, about having someone who wouldn't leave me, about and there's all of this. I don't want to get into kind of deep psyche here, but those girls, they were being rational, and they didn't have hope. I bet they weren't the girls that somebody said to them, "You know what? You're going to be amazing. You're going to change the world. You're the next Michelle Dickinson." No one said that to those girls. Those girls were probably told they were a pile of shit their whole lives. And so this was actually kind of probably the only job they were going to get. And that's what sucks to me. Not that the girls made the choices, but the fact that seemed to be the best option for them. And I want you to think about that option being a rational one for the situation they found themselves in. And that's what sucks. And it sucks that we so devalue child rearing that we see it as a bad option. And I'm not saying that having a kid at 18 is a good option, right? I was very glad that my own son, got through to his 30s before they had a baby. And the same for my daughter, she's in her 20s almost. And she's, I was just so glad she wasn't a teen mum. But they were rational choices given the situation they're faced with.
It's a perfect link into the next. So I always think about the last couple of years of how do you bring, I think success has an awareness issue. People that are at the squeeze, or those that could be something, there's not enough noise out there. I always think about breadcrumbs of positivity which you can create, which you may not be there, but I know. So in my head, I have this character called Rangi, and Rangi's from Rotorua, and he's 15 years old. He's gonna go down to the skate park and smoke weed with his mates. What is one piece of content that I could put online that he then randomly sees as a breadcrumb somewhere to be like, oh shit, that guy looks like me or talks like me or rolls like me. Like stuff, all the, stuff, the corporate shit, the trust fund shit, all the rich shit, stuff, all that. Like that kid, 15-year-old Rangi from Rotorua. What are the breadcrumbs that you can put around his life? And that's where I think about, like how do you sort of scale intent with it? And you're right too, because for me, mine was the driver of, they said, my careers advisor was just like, my chip on my shoulder was when you leave school, you could work at a warehouse packing boxes. That was a ceiling they put. And I was, but I took that because I was a competitive prick. I'm like, stuff you watch me. I'm like, all right, cool. But for me, that was the best thing that anyone could have told me. But if you didn't have that same mindset of being how we are, it would have, I get that.
It could crush you. And I think that's it. I think the breadcrumbs thing's really important. Really important. So a couple of things for me was that, I grew up in quite a violent, difficult home, endured years of sexual abuse. And for me, being able to speak about that publicly, regularly, and I'm kind of sick of it at the moment, but to do that, I think that when I realized it wasn't my shame, that I didn't cause it, was nothing to do with me, and that if I can talk to young women and young men, and even older women and men, and kind of go, you know what, like, I own this. It's nothing to do with me, actually. I didn't choose it. I wouldn't have chosen it. I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm not ashamed of it. It's just some really bad shit that happened. And I hope that in being much more open about those kinds of things, I can also help to give some people some freedom from their own shame and upset around it. Do you know? And I'm not saying I don't have grief or upset. I do. But you know what? I didn't cause it. It's nothing to do with me, really. And so I think those breadcrumbs things, as we get older, I think it's also really important that those of us that have changed the trajectory, what I call like the almost certain future. So if I look at my mother's story and my grandmother's story, my almost certain future was one of being a very poor, bitter, undereducated, woman on a benefit. And that was my almost certain future. And that's why education really mattered to me, because I saw that my mother's resentment around being kicked out of school at 15 to go and work, she had this real drive for education. And so the only way I knew out was to get an education, and
escapism.
It was my escape route. Now, for some of those kids, their escape route will be to get on the DPB so they can afford their own house and get out from under their abusive dad or whatever it is. And we have to help them to see that there are escape routes and that you can follow them. And that people who might look like, they've got it all together and everything, that we all have our own shitty stories in our past.
Yeah. I like that you went there, because it's you get the breadcrumbs thing, because it's, everyone's got their own truth to their own piece, but it's how do you just stop and be like, okay, well, I think as well, people in the squeeze all realize that they represent more than what they think they do.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's that people in the squeeze have a bit more of a self-awareness around it. Before we've got one last question. Garth Bray says, hi, MCI and Robett, good talk. How do we convince people to lock in the positives we've maybe enjoyed this past month? More time with family, less commuting, cleaner air, less fritter and wasteful consumption, when the quickest way back to prosperity is return to status quo?
Yeah, God, I think that's the most fantastic question. And Garth, I'd love to actually hear your answer. But I do feel like, for me anyway, there's a bunch of not going back. I feel like it's shown us that we don't need to fly. I think it's shown us that, it's actually really nice being at home and having dinner every night. Like, I've had to kind of tone down on the catering because as the catering department, even though Mike cooks brilliantly, I was putting out baking and lunch and dinner and
carb it up.
Yeah,
Carb that shit
I'm now
up.
like really looking forward to fasting for a few days. But I feel like there's a slowness that's just been so pleasurable that I hope that we can keep it. And I know that that doesn't work for process workers or people who work on a meat line or, people who are working in factories or supermarkets. But for a lot of the rest of us, this opportunity, even for me to do yoga every day, has just been a real pleasure. And I do want to lock it in. But I'd also like to throw that challenge back out to the community. It's like, how do we have that for everyone? How do we have that for our doctors and our nurses? How do we have that for the people who are working in our meat industry? How do we have it for the people who actually have found themselves twice as busy or twice as stressed under this current world? So that's, I don't have an answer to it. I can do it at my own level, but I want it for everyone, and I don't know how to get it for everyone.
Yes, scaling intent. It's a tricky one to navigate. Before we go, Nicola says, thank you, Melissa, for sharing your story with us.
Thank you.
So enjoyed hearing
Kia
your
ora,
story.
Nicola.
It's an adding you on all my platforms. Lady keeping it real.
I love that. Yeah.
It's a
Mihi nui kia koi. Yeah.
Epic yarns. Shit, I wish we could.
I know, we covered a lot of ground, didn't we? I thought we were going to, we started out so corporate. I thought that's where we were going to end up staying. But
let's talk about cloud transformation to the future of it. It's like, all right, let's go to breadcrumbs.
Let's go to breadcrumbs. Look, breadcrumbs in the end is more important. And it's the same, actually, coming back to your women in tech thing. The women in tech thing for me is leaving breadcrumbs. It's, I've done what I can on the boards I'm on to create associate director roles, and then to haul young women into those roles. I think there's that whole kind of thing about, like, do we want more women at the table because they're women, or do we want women who haul other women up?
Yeah.
And I really believe in hauling other women up. How do we constantly put a hand out? And those 35 to 42-year-olds, we want to drag them into those rooms. They've got insights that we should be listening to, but actually, so do the 19-year-olds. They've grown up in a very different world to the world that I grew up in, and we need to be listening to them as well. So anyway, breadcrumbs and the women in tech is probably how I've survived women in tech. I got an ONZM for this. I was pretty excited. I got the equivalent of the old OBE for services to technology. And
so
I very much saw that as a gift to my community. And I was just so delighted how many of my friends, and especially my women, were delighted about it.
Did you do the same year as Severe? DJ Severe got his, was it the same as
did I?
Yeah,
awesome.
I think it was.
Awesome.
So cool.
Well, I love that there's been a lot more diversity in who's been getting these, and that's not a political thing. I mean, I think over the last 10 years we've seen a much greater diversity in the people who get these awards, and they're community awards. Really, they're not like individual ones, as far as I'm concerned. So,
because it represents more than the person. It's what. I get it.
Yeah,
I get it.
Yeah.
Love your work. I miss you.
You too. It's a joy to get to hang out with you for a bit. You've perked me up for my whole day.
Well, so I missed the yoga with you 27 on the Zooms.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Oh, good shit. All right, thanks, Ismail. I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, buddy.
Love your work.
Kia pai tora.
See ya. Bye.
Bye.
Oh, Mel. Isn't she lovely? Such a good human. Such good chats. Getting in the man, people think it's hard being like a young buck in tech in 2015, 20. Try being a female in tech as a leader and CEO or whatever in 1989. Try that shit. Hell yeah. Meg Melvin, Mahara MCR and Robett, best hour of lockdown. That was awesome. Solid banter. Man, I love that lady. She is amazing. Shot team. I'll see you all soon. Deuces.